Welcome to episode 52, the 2022 Mindful Marketer Forecast on Trendspotting. We're so pleased you're here today. Remember to put in the chat where you are from today. And for those of you who may have to leave early to go shovel snow, we understand. That's what I was doing this morning. And you can always listen to the replay, not only on LinkedIn, but also on your favorite podcast channel. So we are also podcasting on all of your favorite platforms. If you love podcasts, please leave us a review. One other quick piece of housekeeping before I welcome Charlene Li and some other very special guests. I also want to remind you that Omicron is still here, okay? And some of us are still staying home quite a bit, much to our chagrin. This does not mean you need to be isolated. If you are a marketing leader and you're feeling some of that isolation, you're running out of fresh ideas, or maybe you just need peers to give you the real hard truths, then consider applying to our private CMO community known as the Marketing Growth Leaders. This is our 10-year anniversary together, and it's a great dynamic group of leaders. We'll be coming back together soon on January 27th, and we'd love to talk to you if you're just interested in knowing some of the business results and the professional development impact we have had on them. So before I welcome Charlene and set up today's discussion, I see we already have some people asking questions. I'm so excited. But before we begin, I want to share a word from our sponsor, Marvia. So back in 2021, PwC did a study, and they reported that 65% of the people studied are currently looking for a new job. 65%. 2/3 of my clients either changed jobs last year or they got promoted. And you all know what happens when you start a new role. You have a couple of months to not just prove that you're a doer. You also have to prove you're a trend spotter, that you can see above the clouds, you can look behind corners, and you can see new opportunities that other people are missing. So it is a very important time to refine your trend spotting talent. And the goal here is so you build an organization and you build a marketing skill set that's all about winning, not about not losing. Now, what I mean by not losing is we don't want you to be an organization that spreads itself like peanut butter, where you're trying to serve every market and every buyer. You want to find your winning plays. And that's why I'm so excited today, because Charlene Li and I are going to show you some skills that you can acquire, some new ways of thinking about trend spotting. So again, that you are in the winner category. And I have to tell you about Charlene. She was one of the early visionaries and adopters of live streaming. She has a very successful live stream program here on LinkedIn and other platforms. She's also a multi-time best-selling author, and she has research and analysis in her bones. One of my favorite books is The Disruption Mindset. So without further ado, let's all welcome Charlene to the stream. Hello,
Hi,
Charlene.
so good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you. Now, your office or studio looks a little different today. What's happening out there?
I am moving. From my big family home, downsizing because my kids are grown, into a small 3-bedroom apartment, which is a big change.
That is a big change.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably didn't have to get up this morning and shovel snow out there like I did.
No, thank goodness. I am in San Francisco and it just does not snow here. That's why I moved here. So I never have to shovel snow.
Exactly. Well, that's great. It's just great to see you again. And I want you to know we have a great group today already joining. We have several people from Atlanta, Georgia. We have Katie from Atlanta. We have Michael from Atlanta. Brad is out there sharing this broadly with other people on LinkedIn. Hi, Katie. And we have Bill from Portland, Oregon. So I'm very excited to take everyone's questions as we go today. Now, I have to start by asking you something I've never asked you in the years that we've been collaborating. What was the moment when you were growing up when you said, I love research, I love finding and connecting dots that other people may not be connecting?
I think it was the summer between my fourth and fifth grade year in elementary school. And I was just so bored. So I was looking at the bookshelf in our family library and I'm like, oh, here's the encyclopedia. So I started reading the encyclopedia. And as I was going through, I would find like things that were here reference to other places. And I would find all these connections and seeing patterns in things that were in the world in existence. So I spent the summer reading the encyclopedia. That's how geeky and nerdy I was. But I didn't just read it through. I was like connecting the dots and seeing the trends just from just facts that I was absorbing that summer.
So what do you do now that I don't see any hardcover encyclopedias on your bookshelf?
Well, it's called the internet. I'll replace it all, right? And so when I do research, I'm following these trends. I'm trying to dissect and understand what does the future hold? Because what I do is I help people see the future. And it's not the future that I see, but to help them see the future that's going to unfold in front of them and for their organizations. So that's a very different skill than just being a pure futurist. But the foundation is to say, I have certain opinions about how I think the world is going to evolve. I see these trends that are coming out because of the conversations and the research that I do. And so this information is not going to be on the shelf anymore. It's out there. Got to go find it. Talk to as many people to confirm what's really going on. So I have some guesses, but that's not enough. My opinion isn't enough. I need to go and base it on facts and test it and see if it's actually real.
That makes sense. One other thing, could you explain to me and distinguish, because I'm grappling with this, what is the distinction between trend spotting, fad following, and being a futurist like perhaps Amy Webb?
Right. I think the fad following means literally you're following the fads. So you're waiting to see what actually emerges, and then you're going to be a fast follower. And that's a very valid strategy. There's no risk in it. You're already following everything that already has been proven in the marketplace. But that means also you're going to be always a step behind and never the person out front and leading. Trend spotting is where that leadership comes from. It's like you're going out there, you're making some bets about how the world is going to evolve, and you're putting money and investment behind it. Sometimes it'll pay off, sometimes it won't. And as you get better at this, you'll understand what does pay off and get better at spotting these trends. And that gives you a huge competitive advantage, because if you're first in the market, if you're early in to understand where these customers are going to be and you meet them there, that's fantastic. Now, Amy Webb is in a different place. She's way out into the future. And
Yes.
that's great for you to be thinking about. It may influence your trend spotting, but you can't build for that future right now because that's going to be further out. So the futurists play an important role. But for us as practitioners, people who actually have to build product, trend spotting is that sweet spot.
Yes. So could I ask an example here? Because today we were going to talk about trends through the lens of a CMO, through a lens of a marketing leader, versus, becoming experts on cryptocurrency today and how to harness cryptocurrency investments. That's not our sweet spot today. So help me understand, is there a time that you've started to see a trend such as personalization in the world of marketing? Is that still a trend, or do you think it has become more of a mainstream marketing practice?
I think personalization, the whole idea of personalization is very much mainstream. even if it's just the personalization of putting your name on the email, right? It's pretty basic. It's pretty easy to do. What's harder and much more nuanced are all these sort of detailed levels and nuanced levels of personalization, where you're guessing that this is a new emerging trend that people will be interested in. And in particular, that one segment of your customer base would be interested in, and you're putting it in front of them because I know them so well. I know where this trend is. It may be completely new and different for them, but I'm guessing that they will love this. I'll give an example. Campbell Soup does a lot of trend spotting. Not a technology company. They make soup. They make our
Right.
tomato soup that we have for lunch with our, melted cheese bread and everything. So, they were looking at all sorts of trends about what are the emerging taste trends and food trends. So they were looking at texture. They were looking at things like mushrooms, how that was evolving into our culinary diet. If you go into any store now, it used to have just one type of mushroom. Now there are like 8 different types of mushrooms in every single store. And they were looking at the emergence of North African flavors, for example. So, and they were saying these were not things that we were used to, but they were going to introduce them just at the right time when people were beginning to be curious about them.
That's a great example. And boy, I love mushrooms. Oh my gosh. 10 years ago, I thought of one type and I bought white mushrooms, and now it's a panoply of delights. It really is. Speaking of delights, I'm delighted to mention we have a question coming in right now from a mutual friend, Dory Clark, who's going to join us for a question. Hey, Dory.
Oh, hello. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Lisa. So nice to be here with you both.
Welcome. You had a question for us on the heels of your new book launch, The Long Game, which has been phenomenal.
Yes, thank you so much. It's fantastic to get to talk with both of you. Well, I'm actually really curious. We're starting off 2022. Obviously, everybody's thinking about New Year's resolutions and how things are going to be different. And I would love to hear from both of you. How are you playing the long game in 2022? I'm assuming you must have goals and resolutions and things that you want to accomplish. What is the way that you are looking out and being strategic or doing things differently over the next 52 weeks?
Wow, what an amazing question. I'm going to let you go first, Charlene,
Oh,
because I know there's
thanks,
just a
Lisa.
little disruption going on in your life.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of moving and downsizing and changing jobs and so many other types of change. So Dory's question is very, very relevant to me. One of the key things I think about at the end of the year is reflecting back and then looking into the future and saying, what have I accomplished based on my previous goals? And the thing for me is to not just set goals that are achievable, but to set audacious goals that are going to inspire me. So I'm looking at, in particular, writing new types of research, going into new areas. I've traditionally been in digital transformation, and now I'm looking at larger forms of business transformation. So if I look at the pacing of what I'm going to do over the next year, over the next 12 months, there's a research agenda that I have each quarter expanding and growing the areas that I'm looking at. So by the end of the year, I hope I have transitioned my research agenda completely from primarily in the disruption and technology space into much more of the conscious capitalism, the ways that we're going to evolve business and society into these much larger questions that I'm curious about.
That is
I'm looking at
sexy.
the long game of like completely transitioning the focus of my work and research.
Wow, I like it. That is mega big picture, Charlene. That's great.
That's a big one. And for me, I'm actually, I have pared back because last year was a year of experimenting with multiple kinds of marketing activities and so forth, with my mission staying constant, which is I help marketing leaders create stronger companies and better lives. And this year, I'm actually paring back the number of places I'm going to be found because I want to be stronger in places such as LinkedIn, where I'm a faculty member, and also in just a couple of other areas. And then I want to publish more often in larger, more noted publications, such as HBR. Now, my longer game is, Dory, now that you've asked, that I'm investing in for 2, 3, 4 years, is I want to be more notable in arenas such as Thinkers 50. So I'm telling everybody right now on this show that that's what I'm aiming for, because if I don't say it, it cannot come to life. So thank you for prodding me along, my dear friend.
That is sensational. I love those big picture goals as well, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that. It's very inspiring.
Thanks for coming, Dory. We're so glad you could be here today.
I love seeing both of your smiling faces, and take care.
You too. Whew, talk about being put on the spot. I love that, right? Like, oh, I need to be a trend spotter for myself. Okay, I guess we are in it, girl.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a great way to think about trend spotting. It's not just trend spotting what's good for your organization, but also for yourself. You know, what are the opportunities? And I always like to encourage people to think 18 months out from where you are today. Where do you want to be? Not just the next 52 weeks next year, but 18 months, because that's about the time period when you're going to be saying, I'm pretty happy with my job. If all these people, 2/3 of your clients change jobs. In 18 months, they're going to be looking around and going, okay, I've mastered this. Now, what's my next challenge going to be? And to be constantly looking for the trends of what you are interested in, but also what the market needs, is a really good thing to be developing yourself to prepare for yourself 18 months from now.
Yes, I like that timetable or time frame. You remember back when you and I were talking in the first quarter of 2020, when the pandemic was really hitting us hard, and we were talking about like 6 months planning, 12-month planning. Do you think, are your clients feeling a little more confident now that they can do 18 months of trend spotting and start lifting their heads out of the tactical mode?
You know, I don't think they ever were. And that's the key thing, is that as business professionals, as marketers, we tend to think about the next 2 quarters, and that's about it. And it's so dangerous, because unless you're making the investments today to make these big changes way out into the future, you're never going to be ready. You're always going to be behind the market. So it's otherwise, if you're just thinking 1 or 2 quarters out, you're just constantly reacting and doing what we talked about before, fad following, versus trend spotting and making those investments, saying, I think this trend's going to evolve and emerge 12, 18 months from now. And the hardest thing about this is that you may be wrong. And we are not rewarded. We are not encouraged to take these kinds of risks. So one of the hardest parts about trend spotting is creating that environment where you can be right, but also not be right. And it's okay, because you're going to learn from the places where you're not right. And if you're always right, then you're not taking enough risks.
That's a very good measurement right there. You know, if you're constantly right, you're not taking enough risk. I love that. That's going to be one of our mindful moments today. And we have a question here, Charlene, from Michael Taylor in Atlanta. Let's hear what Michael has to say. For B2B businesses, what are some good sources to find data on customer behavior so we can get good clues on trends? I love that he's asking about customer behavior.
Right. And B2B is so difficult, because it's these organizations, and they, again, what do organizations do, right? And again, I keep remembering that organizations are made out of people. And so to the extent that you can participate in CMO roundtables and have insights into those conversations, having direct conversations with people is probably the best way to do trend spotting. And if you think about the other resources that may be aggregating that, I think a lot of the analyst firms who are doing more than just following technology, but looking at B2B trends, hiring, for example, looking at the changes happening in finance. So many groups are now doing this role by role. saying what are the key concerns and pain points for each of these players. So if you can understand what those pain points are through these aggregated reports, again, publications, but more importantly, direct conversations. If you're selling to the B2B market, you're talking to customers all the time. There's no substitute to it.
Now, why is it so difficult to have marketing executives talking directly to the customers as opposed to hiding behind focus groups or online surveys, or worse yet, hoping that the salespeople will give them the right feedback?
I mean, all those other tools are really important. They're part of the toolkit, right? But the reason why you go out and talk to people directly is all those things are giving you ideas. They're giving you hypotheses that then you need to go test, because you take those foundational ideas and people won't directly tell you like, oh yeah, I really want this new thing. You have to piece it out of these trends. And so you can't survey for new trends because they don't exist. And instead, you need to go and talk to people. It's like, hey, I noticed these things happening. Is this something that you would be open to? Is this something you ever considered? And they'll go, I've never thought of that, but that sounds really interesting. And that can only come from a one-to-one conversation. And your salespeople may have these conversations, but they're not trained to be curious about these new trends. They don't even know about these new trends. They're selling the existing products. That's their job. The best and top salespeople may be able to do this. But again, if you don't do this, if you as the executive driving innovation in your company doesn't do this, who else is going to do it?
Exactly. Yes. One of the other things I highly recommend, and Charlene, you've turned me on to so many great tools and technologies over the years. One of my favorite tools so that I can sit and talk to my clients without interruption and pick up those nuances in their behaviors and their emotions is to make sure whatever video conferencing tools you love, whichever, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Teams, whatever tools you use, find a transcription tool that links to that product so that you're not sitting, because I don't know about you, but sitting here and taking notes while someone's speaking is very distracting to me. I want to maintain the connection with them. Let the transcription tool take the notes for you. I love Otter.
Yeah, Otter is fantastic. It just plugs right into Zoom. There are so many other places that will take recordings and then transcribe it, like Rev. It is a fantastic tool. I still take notes, but it's more like high level notes, not detailed, verbatim notes anymore. But the high level notes give me sort of this analysis and high level things. But what I love about Otter and some of these other tools is they give you a summary. They summarize in using AI to give you those insights. And there's one thing I learned about note taking. It's not just about taking the notes in the minute. It's actually saving time afterwards to go back and think about what are the insights coming out of the interview. Because that's what we don't leave time for. We don't say, like, what are the notes in the high level interview? So highlighting them and then going back again a second time and summarizing those notes into a couple bullets at the very top of the interview. Otherwise, your notes are going to be useless. And it's impossible to track these trends. So if you're doing the interview, you usually have some ideas and hypotheses, work those back into your summary notes. Have them hashtagged so you can easily search and find specific trends related to what you're looking at, and you can see them directly in the spot in that interview so you can find it. Otherwise, you're going by memory. And you got to make your treasure trove. There's a whole idea of the second brain, your database of information. Make it work on your behalf to be able to spot these trends that you may not even be aware of.
I hope everybody's taking some notes today. But if you're not taking notes, here's the good news. We will have the article posted next week on all of your favorite places, such as LinkedIn. And if you haven't signed up yet for my newsletter, we will be sending out a newsletter with all of these great ideas. So make sure you are subscribed to themindfulmarketer.com. That's themindfulmarketer.com, so that we can make sure you don't miss a thing, nor our upcoming events. I also want to mention that we have another question coming in here, Charlene, from another friend of ours, Mark Levy. Let's welcome Mark.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi,
Hey,
Mark.
Charlene.
Hi, Mark.
So my question, Charlene, and you touched on this before, but I come up upon this all the time when I'm working with people. How do you conduct the dance? So let's represent one side with Steve Jobs saying, we do no market research, we make what we want to use. There's that, along with the other side of people looking to the future of where they think the future is going and kind of reacting to this vision that's being set by other people and trying to capitalize on that. So it's doing the thing you think the world needs as opposed to reacting to where the world is headed. How do you make that dance?
Yes, that's a great question, Mark. I think the thing about Steve Jobs, he said, we don't do any market research. He was talking very specifically about surveys and focus groups because people can't tell you what they want if they've never seen it before. He actually did a ton of research. The team did a lot of ethnographic research. They would go out and follow people around and see what they did and see what their problems were and notice what those trends were. So they noticed in music that they couldn't take all the music with you. So they came up with this idea of the iPod, of, 10,000 songs in your pocket. Right. It was a selling idea. So they had the idea of this trend that they wanted all this music easily accessible to you, and then they went to go build the product. So that's the key difference between a vision that's built on trend spotting versus your second one, which is like, I'm going to take a mishmash of everything that everyone has and then push it together and kind of make it something new. And that could be really valid too, because you're basing it on all of this wisdom that everybody else has. And again, if you're not very good at the trend spotting, that may be where you start. Right. So I'll give you an example. In my research, I come up with priorities every year. So I'm doing that next week in my live stream. And the way I do the priorities, I look at everybody else's predictions because they write all of them in December of the previous year. Yeah. So I gather all of those. I see what people are seeing, what the trends are. But I'm taking my opinion hypotheses about how I see the world working, and I'm marrying the two together into something new. So I'm able to be creative in taking some opinions and things, but I'm also grounding it in the research. And the fun creative part is putting it into a different way so people look at things in a completely new and different way.
Do you ever make a move that goes against the research that you found because of some other X factor?
Yes. My favorite example is everybody thinks that innovation has to happen outside of the organization. That, again, this is the Clay Christensen idea, the innovator's dilemma, that organizations can't transform, so you got to stick it outside. And all of my observations were that actually companies were innovating and disrupting themselves from the inside out. And the thing that existed today that didn't exist before were all these collaborative technologies now that allow people to actually communicate inside of organizations that were not possible even 10 years ago. And that has fundamentally changed the dynamics of how change happens inside of organizations. So if that is a foundation in connecting all these different dots, I went out and looked for all these companies who are actually disrupting, which resulted in the book that Lisa was holding up earlier, The Disruption Mindset, that says absolutely you can disrupt yourself and you can do it very successfully. And you don't even have to be a tech company to do this.
Right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Mark, great to see you. Thanks for joining us today with that great question.
Thank you.
Gosh, there are so many examples. And it takes a lot of fortitude to do that. I know that people are surprised when they hear the story about Lyft. Lyft started out trying to get off the ground with a carpooling app. They went to government and corporations and they tried to persuade them, and universities. They tried to persuade universities and corporations to use this carpooling app. and they just couldn't get the traction. They tried for 2.5 years, just couldn't get anywhere. But then they went ahead and said, maybe we've got something here, more of a, an app for individuals. But that took them 2.5 years. And that's when they saw their business soar. And, it took them a while to discover their value. But to be able to make that shift, no pun intended, it does take that mental fortitude.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, where if you're only thinking about one thing in a certain direction, and I have met so many entrepreneurs who are so resilient, so insistent that their vision of the world is going to come true. But at some point, you may go like, it's not coming true. And so where is that balance between when you're saying, what I thought the world was going to work was going to be this way, and it's not. So what else is out there? And being able to have that resilience and frankly, the humility to say, that's not the path. This one is maybe. Let's go and test it. To be able to set aside something that you're so dedicated to for 2 years. You founded the company on this idea, and now you have to give it up. That's incredibly difficult. And so I give so much credit to Lyft, not that they came up with the ride sharing idea, but they were able to let go of the original idea to even try on a different approach. So
yes,
again, pivots happen all the time. Are we able to identify the pivot? When's the right time to make the pivot? Who knows what the right answer is, right?
Yeah. And one other company I want to give credit to, and I'm a fan of reading these success stories. It's not enough. And that's another thing I want to share with the group here is it's not enough to just sit back and say, well, I'll just read success stories in HBR, or I'll go read some case studies and maybe I'll get some ideas. However, another example in the B2B space versus the B2C space. Now we've talked about mushrooms. We've talked about ride sharing. We can also talk about B2B software, enterprise software. I think Qualtrics and the co-founder, Ryan Smith, is a great example of what you can do to be a trend spotter, even in B2B software, where back in 2008, 2009, they had some hard decisions. Then again, in 2012, they had some hard decisions. They were spending a lot of all their resources on calling on universities. It wasn't highly profitable and it wasn't very scalable. But then, they had those hard internal conversations about how do we take our solutions and turn them into a single platform for the enterprise. And they waited until they got to that level of 400 people on their team and a level of maturity of thinking that then they started accepting funding from the VC community, and they saw their business soar. They found that market opportunity. And then, of course, before they could go public, SAP swooped in and bought them for $8 billion. So for those of you, send me an email or drop a note here if you're interested in that story. I'll send you the link to the HBR article. It's so inspiring. Charlene, we have one other comment here from Katie, and then how did all this time grow? I don't know how this time flew. I don't know. Katie says this idea of testing concepts and approaches aligns with the idea of marketing organizations adopting agile methodologies that are commonly or formerly only used in software development. What are you seeing among your clients, Charlene?
Oh, it's actually the whole idea of Agile. Again, you can think about Agile as a process with 2-week sprints and stand-up meetings and all those things. But it's also just a mindset that says, instead of trying to get myself all the decisions, all the information up front right, I'm going to start by saying, what are the most fundamental questions that I have to answer before I can take the next step? So you may get to the same point in about the same amount of time, but you're reducing the risk that you come up with the right answer. Because if you put all of your eggs in one basket and you're doing all this research and then you pull the trigger and it's wrong, well, you're stuck. Agile actually says, I'm going to make a series of decisions all the way along to get closer and closer to the end. instead of having to make them all up front. And so I use this one concept called minimally viable data instead of minimally viable product. What's the minimum amount of data that I need to answer the very first question? And that's not the way we as marketers work. We have to answer all the questions before we can answer it. And the fundamental reason why Agile is so difficult is that we think of every decision as being permanent, that we have to be right. So we can't go back. We have to be right. In reality, 99% of the decisions we make are reversible. We just don't feel comfortable doing that because as people, we don't want to have to admit that we were wrong. So there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of shame around this. There's so much that has to be let go if we want to truly become this modern organization, this agile organization capable of moving at these fast paces, making rapid decisions, but also going back and redoing things if we were wrong. And that's not something we're wired to do. That's not the way most leaders and organizations work.
Most definitely. Oh, you wanted me to be vulnerable? Oh, wait, hey, hold on a second here. I also want to ask people to put in the chat right now, what is one skill you want to cultivate in 2022 to help you be a trend spotter? So I'm going to leave that chat open and keep hearing from everyone. As we wrap up, Charlene, name for us 2 or 3 people whom you consider really effective at being trend spotters who inspire you.
I don't know it's so much people, but the places I go to get new ideas and be inspired. My favorite place to go, and it's so obvious, but I always forget about it sometimes, is TED, the TED Talks. And whatever trend I'm looking at and following, I'll go and just search across TED and say, has anybody talked about this? And it could have been years ago, but it's still just so fascinating to get a person's perspective. And what I love about TED Talks is there's a very strong perspective in every single talk. It's not like, well, I think it's going to be 50% like this and 25% of that. They make the call and give you an idea that's very clear and concrete in 10 minutes. And I love TED for that. And then there are a bunch of other sites that I just constantly go into, but I always love Cool Hunting. It's just a great site because people can vote on the ideas, and it's just been around forever. And it's a place where new ideas get surfaced. But what I really like about it is it's a place where I can go and see what other people think about the trends. So it isn't just a trend. It's like this whole community. But there are a ton of trend watching places, but those are 2 of my favorites.
Well, it has been such a delight to see you today, Charlene. And we're going to ask Marissa, my wonderful producer, to put the link to your live stream on LinkedIn here before you wrap up, and make sure people follow you on those Tuesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I hope you'll come back again very soon this year. Happy move to you, Charlene, and stay healthy out in San Francisco.
Same to you. Love talking to you. Bye-bye.
Likewise. Bye-bye. And now it's time for our mindful moments before we wrap up. Compliments of Marvia, our sponsor. Here are some things that I took away from today's conversation with the inimitable Miss Charlene Li. My mindful moment number 1 is that this is a great time to put yourself into this 18-month time bubble. What are a few steps I can take now that will help me leverage the trends that I'm seeing over the next 18 months? So use that as your time bubble. The other mindful moment, I love this one, this aphorism: if you're not making any mistakes, then you are not taking enough risk. So for all of us who had an existential crisis over the last 2 years, please use it as a time to harness opportunities and take some risks that you were afraid to take before. And number 3, I loved Charlene's idea about taking your notes from your customer conversations or your marketing meetings with your teams. Make sure you're transcribing those and go back at least twice and look for those patterns and take your hypothesis and layer it on top to see where the consistencies may lie. Very wise words from Charlene. And I am so pleased that you were able to share these mindful moments with me today. So as you leave for the weekend, know that we are here twice per month on LinkedIn Live. We love having you. Don't miss a show. Make sure you've signed up for our newsletter. And on January 21st, I will be joined by a fellow friend and client, Stuart Foster. He was the former CMO of Topgolf, head of global marketing at Hilton, and he has been applying his wisdom on experiential branding for several years. He's going to share with us what it looks like in the post-COVID world. Do not miss January 21st with Stuart Foster. Until then, stay healthy, enjoy shoveling some snow, if you will, and we'll see you on the 21st.